at least 2 years of college to qualify it, and 20 years old. So I went back to school. I went back to the University of Texas at school. And after that, I did a hell of a job of trying to find a job in flying. But all those positions were taken.
Really?
Well, there were so many pilots.
Yeah. And the airlines wanted 4-engine stuff, and I only had 2-engine stuff, and so they got first crack at it and first option. I wrote to about 4 or 5 airlines, and never got a reply from any of them. So I figured that's a dead dog. But I finally got into my own business.
Oh, you did? Okay. What was the business?
I had been transferred. I was in with an air freight company, and I got transferred to Burbank.
Okay.
And from Burbank, they put me into the flight control for that little freight liner, and I ended up in Palo Alto.
Oh, okay.
And I've been here for 20 years now, or more than
Yeah,
that.
but you got out of the airline industry after a while. Pretty soon after that,
Yeah.
we were a stocking distributor of laboratory pumps. So that's what we've been doing for.
Yeah,
I've been
our
doing-
business was, and Lee and I had a business of repair on the test chambers and so forth for the space program, which was just breaking open and so forth.
Wow.
And I helped with the engineering and proposals for Lockheed's environmental test chambers and so forth like that. So it was interesting, and at that time it was the thing, space was the thing, and so I got in kind of on the ground floor with it so far as the equipment and testing of it is concerned.
Hi, Pat. I'm Don Downey. I'm friends of Don Long, the Pearl Harbor
I
survivor.
know very well.
So I recorded his life history, and I actually made him a book, or for most of the Pearl Harbors that are up in Concord. And I guess he's Napa, of course. And unfortunately, I just went to his services a month ago or so. Can I record you now? If you guys want to sit down and see while they're waiting for, I guess.
I'll sit down.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah,
And
no problem.
so what I was thinking, you really got my attention, Pat. Maybe I'll go over here and out of the way a little bit. And when you said you went to the University of Texas, if you would do me a big favor and pick up the story there, that's actually the school I went to in Austin, right? You went to Austin?
Yeah.
Yes, Austin,
Okay.
and I finished with an engineering degree,
Right.
and looked around for a job,
Yeah,
and some of these surplus airplanes like the C-46 and so forth were available, and several people tried to start their own airlines, particularly in freight. That was an area that seemed to be appropriate for the, and they picked up these C-47s, that Curtiss twin-engine freight carrier, and I worked on as station manager for St. Louis, and then I went to Chicago, and then I went to Cleveland, and then I went to Dayton, and so forth. And finally, I ended up in Burbank as part of the flight control unit for this airline. And after that,
Oh yeah, what airline was that, please, Pat? Thank you.
Flying Tigers and Slick Airways were the two major freight carriers that were trying to get started. Unfortunately, those that had freight contracts for hauling the mail was all of those contracts were taken, and that was the lifeblood of airlines at that time. Finally, from the I was lucky to get a job in with some a company that makes scientific equipment, Bell and Howell, and I got with Bell and Howell, and from Bell and Howell I knew a lot about the maintenance and servicing and cleanup of vacuum pumps. And the vacuum pumps led me into the environmental chamber business, and I worked in that. And as I mentioned, Lockheed, I was in Palo Alto at the time, and Lockheed was building these huge chambers to test the equipment for the first astronaut flights. So then I, from my mechanical...
Well, Pat, I can't let you step past that. Tell us about the NASA stuff. Tell us about the Lockheed work for the space program real quick. Stretch that one out. Thank you, Pat.
That's interesting.
Well, everything...
That's history.
Where do you want me to start? Everything from the wristwatch to the capsules had to be go through an environmental test program for temperature and heat and be able to withstand the takeoff of a rocket, and they had vibration tests and so forth. So they also wanted to get the test equipment real life. In other words, you don't just test a small item, but you test the whole capsule and so forth at a time for its job in space. And so from there, I picked up some people that were, or I knew people that were familiar with vacuum and vacuum equipment, high vacuum, such as the atmosphere of the moon. And so my son and I started a business with that, and that's where I ended up quitting the business, retiring.
Well, stretch that. Excuse me, Pat. I started to interrupt, but this is really just unbelievable. You guys started a business. You got to give a couple of minutes to that. Tell us all about the starting up of your own business. I mean, that's incredible.
Well, the business, vacuum equipment for working with these test chambers was, there was no one, or very few people, that knew how to repair them and clean them up after they had been in a test or a failure test. And so I found that some of the big companies that were in bidding the contract, they had to send the vacuum equipment back to the manufacturer. In some cases, this was back to Germany. So it was easy to find, to gather some of the individuals who were kind of tired of doing everything themselves. And it was a small company, but maybe 8 or 10 of us got collected. So I started my own business and put my own name on it. So there you are. And then after that, all you have to worry about is government regulations. No problem. And that continued, I guess, for maybe, what did we have it for, about 25 years. So and I had a shop in location out at Livermore.
Well, 25 years, I would call that a successful business, of course, Pat. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so what kind of time span was that in 25 years between approximately, you know?
Well, I retired 5 years ago, I believe. My son will correct me on all this.
Well, we started in '81.
We started in '81, yeah,
Then
okay.
I had a stroke about 5 years ago, which knocked me out of the business. And Dad, being that he was 95, he figured that he might want to retire.
At 95, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I stayed with the business for quite a while. And as Lee says, his inability to he was the sales department, the trucking department, and some office work. But when he became incapacitated due to the stroke, in my age, I said, why keep fighting it? I'm going to get out of this thing. And I was successful enough to get out of it and retire comfortably. Okay.
Oh, good.
Now, let me ask a question here. If my math is right, you started that business when you were about 70.
It could have been, yeah.
And you were working on what is really was the edges of technology.
Most of it was, yeah.
And
Yeah.
you had the experience and the knowledge to be on the frontiers of science there in the space program.
Yeah, I was old enough to be an astronaut, but and that's what intrigued me. John Glenn and I probably are very close to the same age, and but I never even attempted an application with him. I had my business and so forth, and it was going along. So it never really got serious about whether I wanted to try to be an astronaut or not.
Yeah. You were behind the scenes. You were behind the scenes making it happen.
Yeah. I saw 2 or 3 of them, but that was just when we happened to be in the same hotel at the same time.
Well, I should say I'm so crazy about the space program. My entire living room is lined with NASA photos that are autographed by him. I mean, it's wall-to-wall photos, so I am just in awe of all you guys, especially the people behind the scenes, from the secretaries all the way to the engineers like you.
Well, there was
Wow.
it was obviously a new adventure for everybody, and I was, of course, fascinated. But then my part in it was, more or less picking up the pieces and putting them back together again.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Well, that was a vital part.
Yeah.
People are going
Well,
to explore space.
one of
They
the-
got to be ready to work in a vacuum.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I attended and made proposals for the company, wrote up the technical proposal for a couple of large chambers, not by myself, but I mean, I participated in it. Also at Houston. Houston was just starting up, the flight center, space center there. But some of the equipment that we designed and our expertise was in high vacuum work. In other words, we had to know what kind of pumps could evacuate air and all the other stray gases, such to simulate space. And Lockheed guys, I remember the first conference table we sat around with, they didn't realize that air was just, their engineers learned from us what once you get beyond oh, 40 or 50,000 feet, things change, and they become items that requires specialized pumps. There were electronic pumps. There were mostly at that time there were diffusion pumps, and of course the mechanical pumps were simply getting the space chamber up to maybe 75,000 feet. But now you got space that changes. You're not the molecules of air that we have right now. You can actually feel them. They're a fluid, and later on they simply become molecules like bees in a room. They're all going at different ways, at different speeds, and you have to be able to either ionize them or in some cases a diffusion pump, which is a combination of ultrasonic speeds of oil, and the Lockheed engineers who were in charge of getting this equipment, this huge chamber. It was 8 feet in diameter and about 40 feet high, and it's still there over at Lockheed. Was getting this equipment engineered for what we knew, that the conditions of the moon, we knew that. So that's what you had to, that was the example of what you had to attain. I mean, that performance is what you had to attain.
Well, I bet the astronauts were thankful to think when they closed that hatch. Right?
Well, I've been to the Space Museum in Washington, but that was several years ago, and they had the original capsule there, and that Shepard and John Glenn and so on. I think Shepard was the first guy in space. He just went up and came down. John Glenn had 3 trips around and so forth.
When I think of Shepard, I think first they strap in the monkey, then they put Shepard up, then they sent another monkey up because they to test it right. So it's unbelievable what he did.
Yeah. Well, it set us back. I mean,
For a chimp, yeah.
along comes Russia with Sputnik, and
The Russians sent a dog to space.
that really stirred the science word, and I think they sent a monkey or something up. No, they had this small ball, which was Sputnik, and later on they did send monkeys up there, but I'm not clear on it.
Yeah, Sputnik shocked America.
Yeah.
But the Russians had beat us in space. I remember that.
Oh yeah, that's one of
I
our.
was in junior high school, and our school changed everything.
Yeah.
I mean, they started advanced placement stuff. They started heavy math and science. Changed the courses. It revolutionized our world. And I grew up in Burbank the first 13 years of my life. And for part of that time, I lived about a mile from Lockheed.
Oh really?
And that all inspired me to want to become a pilot.
Wow.
My
You flew too?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
my association with Lockheed goes right to their planes. I flew the Lockheed planes in World War II, so got familiar with some of their engineers. But our job was to. I wanted to stay in multi-engine work, and I got into these Venturas and Harpoons, which was twin engine stuff. Come on in. We're lonely. So I was going to continue our conversation about military experience and history. I was in the first Lockheed Ventura squadron that went to the Aleutians. So it was quite a transition, because before then, all my training had been in PBYs.
Which is a flying boat.
That's right, yeah.
You landed on the water in those airplanes.
Yeah, it was, and later on they made them amphibious, but first ones that you had to pull them up a ramp by hand to get them on shore. So, yeah, all of that took place in Corpus Christi. And when many of us didn't like the idea of going in where we were assigned, because the Aleutian Islands is not the fun place. And I was up there for 3 tours. We'd come back, reform, go back, reform 3 times, 43, 44, and 45.
I bet the California weather looked pretty good after.
It was beautiful, yeah, it was. Well, it was so barren. It's all volcanic. The islands there were created out of volcanic eruptions, and it's part of the circle of fire that, if you look at and of course they had a woman under every tree.
No trees.
But there weren't any trees. Somebody took a 2x4 or a 4x4, drilled some holes, and it filled up some weeds and stuck it in there and made a Christmas tree out of it. So that was one of the first trees I ever saw out there.
Well, you were on the frontier, both technologically and
Yeah,
geographically.
aeronautically, we brought in some of the first planes, land-based bombers and patrol planes. I mean, it went from the PBY, which was about pretty good at cruising, about 105 knots, and it also landed pretty close to that. And but that was one of the most interesting planes that you can imagine. It had a crew of around 7 or 8. They had the first radar. We got it from Britain for patrol work. And later on, we got the first Loran for navigation. Before then, they gave us octant or a sextant to do our navigation with instruments of that thing. But when we got to the Aleutians, you never could see the stars anyway. Well, most of the time you couldn't see the stars. But it was an education. They even had, the plane was so adaptable that one of the items in the plane was a little tin horn. And when you landed in a harbor or something, or where the fog or something was a problem, and you didn't want to run into any ships in there, someone had to go. One of the crew had to go and get in the nose of the PBY and blow that horn every few seconds. So, just like you were a ship coming in, you know.
But
I
you
didn't
were
have to.
coming in a little faster than those ships.
Yeah. Well, the PBY was it fascinated a lot of us because it was so adaptable. Could even, and obviously it had quite a bit of action, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Dutch Harbor was bombed, and that was they not the PBYs were being always came out second best in any kind of a contact. They just couldn't keep up with the Japanese fighters and so on.
Well,
Is this on?
yes, it is. They painted them black, and then they'd go in at night, I guess, sometimes. During the war, but
The Black Cat,
Yeah.
there was a Black Cat squadron. Ours had the traditional shades of blue for camouflage. So we didn't have any Black Cats, although the instrument flying was uppermost in the conditions of the Alaska and the Aleutian Islands and Kamchatka Peninsula, and where we ended up sometime.
well, I know you probably want to hear more about aeronautics and
He's got more diversity in his experience than I have. So
Awesome. But maybe my question would be, tell me about Texas. How did you wind up at Texas? Were you raised in Texas, or there's some connection?
oh yes, my hometown was a little farm and ranch community about 60 miles from San Antonio.
So which direction from San Antonio?
Southeast.
So you're like out in cattle country or farm?
Yeah, it was farm and ranch.
Yeah.
And
Pretty country though, right? Yeah.
well, it's rolling, and it was it had good climate. I mean, it's rainfall and so forth. It was nice for the grazing and for cattle. It was also fertile enough so that you could grow crops on it, corn and hay and so forth could be grown on it. I came through the Depression years that were still going on, and somebody had asked me how was that? Well, I was quite young. Maybe it lasted until the war started, but nobody starved. I mean, we took care of our neighbors and so forth. The cattle and the hogs were butchered for meat. There was a meat market and restaurant and so forth, but nobody had any money. There was a bank there, but nobody had anything in their pocket to rattle, you know.
Well, let's see, let's go do
For me, I always thought it was hardest on like the dads. You know, the kids, maybe you guys kind of get by, but I just can't imagine being a father and not being able to get a job, or just that whole thing. I thought was just not the best of times.
Now that happened, not in my family necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, we were average in terms of food, clothing, and shelter, but
And then
a lot of them
how'd you
weren't.
get in the military? How'd you make that transition?
Well, in order to get in, you had to be 20 years old. You had to pass the physical. You had to have at least half the credits towards a degree, and they didn't tell you what kind of degree you had to have. You could be quilting if you want. You could have a degree in quilting and still get in the Navy or the Air Force. So at the time of Pearl Harbor, I had already signed up on my birthday, which is in November, and Pearl Harbor happened December 7th. So I was signed up and I had taken my physical, but I didn't have any orders to report anywhere. And I didn't get any orders to report until January 2nd. That was about 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor. So you're sitting, you go through Christmas wondering when the telegram's going to come, you know.
It's on, yeah. Wow. That is really.
Came from Texas, what made you want to go into the Navy?
accidental. Partly. Well, my father was an Army lieutenant in World War One, so I was kind of expected to stay in the Army. However, I was in school, in college, and a friend of mine, who was a classmate, came through, and I got to talking to him, and he had on that beautiful green Marine flight uniform and had the gold wings up here, and he had, and I had never seen a green uniform before in my life, but you might say that little kind of gave me the edge to go to the Navy. So I went down, and as soon as I turned, within a few days of turning 20, I went down into a recruiting office, which was in the basement of the post office. And I got to talking to this yeoman, and he gave me all of the application information, and so I filled it out, and sure enough, they called me up and gave me a bus ticket to Dallas to get my examination, physical. So from then on, that sign they put across your drawers when they issue your underwear, property of U.S. Navy. And you stayed that way.
You stamped it on your forehead.
It was stamped across your ass is what it was. But you had that experience. You went, you're an Annapolis graduate to start out with. And we didn't learn a lot about
Ron, I've got your
Navy.
picture in here. Are you Pat?
Yeah,
Yes.
Are you sure?
yeah. Who's this?
I'm Gil Ferry. How are you?
CV-12?
I was not in the Navy. I was in the Army flying helicopters in Vietnam. But a friend of yours, Ty Ramey's assistant,
Oh,
his
yeah.
name is Melissa Moorhead,
Yeah.
called an organization, the Commemorative Air Force, and I got a call and said, "Can you put together some kind of a gathering for Pat on his 100th birthday?" And I thought, well, I think we can probably bring 3 other 100-year-olds or a couple 99-year-olds who are in there now. They're waiting for you to show up.
Are they here?
Yeah, they're all here now.
Okay.
There are 2 that couldn't make it. Well, 3. One of them died.
Well, Melissa is not going to be here.
No, she has to work today, like some other people.
She's a very charming girl.
She really is. She just got married, by the way. Did you know that?
I knew that,
At age
and
41.
I knew about Don Long too, by the way.
Yeah.
I flew in the they brought a PBY to Napa. Some of the people returning from the 75th anniversary in Hawaii, and they came by and stopped to pick up Don Long up at Napa, and I was invited to go with them, and we went over, took off in this PBY off the runway at
Catalina?
Napa,
Catalina.
and we flew,
Catalina?
the Catalina. And we flew over to Lake Berryessa, and they landed on the water and floated around a while and took off again and came back to Napa and put the wheels down instead of the floats.
Couldn't have been any better, huh?
Yeah, I was very, very interesting because I told the pilots that I had that's what I had trained in
You flew up in Alaska quite a bit.
all the time.
Out of Adak or where? Or Attu?
At first, it was Adak, and then it was Amchitka, and then it was Attu. Attu mostly. And it started in 1944 after the Kiska garrison had been evacuated. They evacuated the Kiska garrison, and Attu, the Battle of Attu, I was involved. I was a co-pilot then, but I was involved in it.
Were you there when there were P-38s in the 11th Air Force up there, and they flew with a B-17 mothership to navigate because the fog was so bad.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And one of them, 6 of these P-38s took off one day from I think from Attu, and they flew toward Paramashibu in the Kuril Islands, and they intercepted some Japanese Betty bombers coming in to bomb Attu. And when the Betty bombers saw these P-38s, who were a little more maneuverable than the Betty bombers, they turned tail and headed back to Japan. But what we didn't know is that they had since mounted machine guns in the tail of the Betty bombers. So as they turned tail, they fired at the P-38s and shot down the squadron leader, never seen again, and another pilot who I met, who had to land his P-38 in Massacre Bay. And they picked him up with a Kingfisher,
What bay?
Massacre Bay,
That,
on
yeah,
Attu.
that's Attu. Yeah.
And they picked, Kingfisher picked him up. The observer, I guess that's what he was called. He had a pilot and an observer and a Kingfisher.
Yeah.
He got out of his seat, walked out on the wing, popped the Mae West of the surviving pilot of the P-38, pulled him onto the wing, put him in a seat. He taxied back to a tender, poured hot coffee down both ends of them, and gave him a hot shower, and he survived.
But I never knew any details about that, but I do remember the incident of them intercepting the Betty bombers on the way in.
I've got a bunch of pictures of that. I'd love to. I was going to bring them. I didn't do it. And they're official military photos.
Yeah. I've assembled a lot of information. I have all of the sortie reports, the briefing reports from the pilots and crew for every sortie that was our squadron was in, and we had 4 Ventura squadrons up there, and I was in one squadron for I'd come back, I had 3 tours,
Was the Ventura the name of the first model that Lockheed built, and there was a second model called something else?
That was
third
the
one-
original, yeah, and they
The
even
third was
used,
the Harpoon.
the Harpoon was came out in 1944.
Was it faster?
No, it was just more of a patrol plane. It had more stability, less speed. But at Ventura, we liked it. Some pilots liked it, and some pilots were not really up to speed with it. They came from, they had been trained and onto the Alaska and Aleutian Islands and PBYs, the Cavina, and they just did not want to accept this frisky little plane instead of that docile float plane that had so many creature comforts.
What could you cruise at in the Ventura or the Harpoon?
It was good for long range cruise when we went over our missions. We generally cruised at what I might say an economical cruise, and it was about 150 knots. And that's about 170 miles an hour.
Was it set up to drop torpedoes?
Heaven help me, I don't want to drop a torpedo.
You did drop one
Yes.
by
But it
accident?
was, no, in practice, I dropped one accidentally, but the people back in New Hampshire, where was it, the torpedo center, they just didn't make anything that could withstand. The PBY could drive it okay, they're at 100 knots. The Ventura, we wanted to be at 200 knots when we dropped it. Well, the torpedoes couldn't handle it. They flipped, they went down and just made a splash. And you had to get right down the throat of the guns in order to be accurate with it.
You dropped gravity bombs too, though, did you?
Sorry?
Did you drop gravity bombs also?
Oh, yeah,
done
normally we carried, it's a long story, but I was in 3 squadrons and we all did different things each time. But we had the first, we had photo flash bombs at first because they didn't have any good photographs of the Korean Islands. And the best things they had in reconnoitering the Korean Islands was what's this magazine? National Geographic. They used National Geographic to learn what
Best
was on
maps
those
they had.
islands, and that got outdated quickly. So forth. You guys want to get some lunch?
Yeah.
You got all you want?
Well, thank you, and I'll give a copy of all this to your son. And yeah, so I'm all good, and thanks everybody.
You don't want to come in and shoot the rest of them?
Yeah, let's do that. And then, did you want to do a group photo with the veterans?
Sure, absolutely.
Great. Well, anytime you're ready, I'll